Hi, my name's Ben, and I'm going to show you how to bake a loaf of sourdough bread. So sourdough bread is one of the tastiest things in the universe. It's crunchy and chewy and tangy, and it does take a bit of patience to make, but trust me, it's worth it. For this recipe, which is based on the Tartine style of baking, we're going to be using 400 grams of white or all-purpose flour, 100 grams of whole wheat flour, 350 grams of warm water, 12 grams of salt, 100 grams of bubbly sourdough starter, and if you don't have a starter, you can check out the link below, and a handful of rice flour. The equipment we're going to be using is a mixing bowl, a good old Dutch oven, a kitchen scale, a dough scraper, or a big spatula will do, a lamb or a sharp knife will do the trick, a proofing basket. If you don't have one of these, a bowl with a tea towel will do the trick, a plastic bag, some parchment paper, and some plastic wrap. Now, let's begin. So first you're going to add your 350 grams of warm water to your mixing bowl. And then you're going to add 100 grams of your starter. So I can tell my starter is ready to bake with because it floats in this water. Then you're going to mix in the starter in the water. Just get it nice and dissolved in there. And then you're going to add in your 400 grams of all-purpose flour. And your 100 grams of whole wheat flour. And then you're going to just roughly mix up this concoction. You don't need to mix it like crazy, but just until it's all combined. You can see the dough is still pretty shaggy and ragged in there. And then you're going to cover it up with a bit of plastic wrap and then let it sit for 45 minutes. This is called the autolyse period, and it lets the flour hydrate and gluten bonds start to form. Now we're going to uncover this baby and sprinkle in our 12 grams of salt. If you were going to add seeds or other flavors, now would be the time to do that. And then you're going to get your hand wet and just fold that salt into the dough. It doesn't matter if it's totally combined because that'll happen later. Now you're going to cover it up again and put it in a warm place for half an hour. A good option is turning on the light in your oven and putting it in there. It's important that the dough stays warm so that all of the sourdough cultures can stay active and digest the flour. Now we're going to fold the dough. So you just get your hand wet, reach to the bottom, and pull it across the top. You can do this a few different times in different directions. And you can be pretty rough about it because at this point we're just really trying to get good stretch and good gluten development. Now you're going to cover it up again and put it back in its warm spot for another half hour. So now we're going to do another fold. You can see that the dough is a bit smoother and softer already. And you're going to do one of these folds 4 more times every half hour. I know, it's a lot. And make sure that you cover the dough and put it back in its warm spot after every fold. now I'm going to do the 6th and final fold. And so you can see now my dough is quite light and fluffy and there's bubbles along the side. And so for this fold, I'm going to go very gentle on it to try and make sure I don't compress any of those bubbles out of it. And so for the last couple folds you do want to treat your dough very gently. So now I'm going to put this back in the warm spot and I'm going to leave it for 1 hour. Okay, so now our dough is looking nice and fluffy and shiny, and there's some good bubbles along the side. If your dough doesn't look like this quite yet, you can put it back in the warm spot for another hour until it does. But since ours is looking good, I'm going to scoop it out onto the work surface. So now I'm just going to sprinkle some flour over top of the dough, get it not so sticky. And then using my dough scraper, I'm going to do some J strokes to get this into more of a ball. You can add a little more flour if it's getting sticky, but you're just trying to build some surface tension here. Once I'm happy with that shape, then I can take my mixing bowl, plunk it over top, and then leave it there for 20 minutes. While we're waiting the 20 minutes for this guy, we can prep our proofing basket. So I ran a little bit of water over this and then let it mostly dry. Then I've got my rice flour here, and I'm going to just sprinkle it on here. You can be pretty generous because any extra will just fall off later, so it's no big deal. And you just want to get it a nice even coating over the whole inside. And so you can just kind of rub it in there. That should do the trick. And if you are using a bowl and a tea towel, you can just put the tea towel in the bowl like that, and then just liberally sprinkle your rice flour inside the bowl like that, inside the towel. So now that the dough has rested a bit, we're going to take the mixing bowl off. And we're going to flip this dough over onto its back. We can add a little more flour first, just to make sure it's not too sticky. Just give that a good flip. So this next part looks a bit tricky, and it is, but you'll get the hang of it. So kind of flatten it out into a bit of a square here. And then I'm going to grab this part in front of me, pull it towards me, and then fold it over. Tuck it in. And you're going to do the same on the right side. Pull it out and tuck it in like that. And you're going to do the same on the left side. Pull it out, tuck it in, and then on the back, the very same. Pull it out, tuck it in, and then our final movement, we're going to do one more pull from the front and flip that puppy over. So what we've just done here is we've created some good surface tension on this, which is going to make for a great crust and a good rise. So now we can add a little bit more flour on top of here and just kind of pinch any seams to make sure it's all looking good and tidy. And I'll flour my hands up a little bit, make sure this guy's just in a nice round ball here. And then I'll grab my proofing basket here, and very carefully I'm going to flip this dough ball over and put it into the proofing basket. I'll flip it over like that. And so then what I'll do is I'll just kind of pinch up any seams here, make sure that it's all looking fairly tight and even. And then I will give another sprinkling of flour on top of that. And then I'm going to grab my plastic bag and I'm going to slip the whole proofing basket right inside there. And I'll just tuck it in at the bottom, seal it up. And so then I'm going to put this in the fridge overnight to rise for at least 12 hours, up to 18 if you'd like. So it's 12 hours later, and I've taken my dough out of the fridge, and as we can see, it's risen a bit, and it's looking ready to bake. And I'm just going to leave it on the counter to warm up a bit. And meanwhile, I'm going to turn my oven on to 525 degrees Fahrenheit. If your oven only goes up to 500, that's okay, that'll work. And I'm going to put the Dutch oven inside to preheat with the lid off. While the oven is preheating, we're going to grab our dough and tip it around a little bit to just make sure none of the edges are going to stick. And then we take our big piece of parchment paper, put it over top of the dough, and then we're going to carefully flip the whole thing over. And lay it down and carefully remove the proofing basket. And voila! And we're now going to take a pair of scissors and trim the parchment paper down to size. And I'm going to leave some little handles at either end so that we can actually lift the whole deal up and put it into our Dutch oven when it's preheated. Now we're going to take our lamb, or a really sharp knife, and make a series of cuts across the surface of the dough. This is called scoring, and it lets the bread rise better in the oven. You can do whatever pattern you want. Get creative. I'm going to do a big X and a few decorative elements. It's important to be pretty quick with these so your blade doesn't stick. And now this dough is ready to bake. Now that our oven is preheated to 525, we're going to open it up and take out the Dutch oven. And then very carefully, we are going to lift up and lower our dough right into the middle. We can kind of make sure that our parchment paper isn't getting in the way there. And we'll put the lid back on. Put it right back in the oven. Then we're going to lower the temperature to 450 and leave it in there for 20 minutes. Now we're going to take it out of the oven and take the lid off. Ooh, and we can see it's risen really nicely there. And then we're going to put it back into the oven without the lid on for another 20 to 30 minutes until the crust is a nice golden brown. We're now going to take this loaf out of the oven and see how it looks. Oh yeah! So you can see we've got a nice golden brown crust there with just a little bit of blackening around the edges, which is just how I like it. And I'm just going to tip this baby out and place it onto a cooling rack. Now, it's going to be hard, but you should wait at least 45 minutes for the loaf to cool down a bit and solidify on the inside. But then, dig in and enjoy your homemade sourdough bread. My name is Ben Barrett-Forrest. Thanks for baking with me.